The huge storm that made landfall in Florida caused tremendous havoc, wreaked havoc on the population, on property, on even human lives in Florida. It's now very clear, aside from the fact that there was, again, Democratic and Republican arguments over the treatment of the area that had been devastated by the storm, and whether or not the federal government or the state government or the administration has done enough, has done properly. Of course, this is, again, instead of worrying about the population that had been deeply affected, it was a battle over criticizing who's to blame, what the problems were. The political argument between the Democrats and the Republicans is just showing how ridiculous the administration of the United States as a country has become. What's more important is what climate change is doing to the earth. The key to this, of course, is reduction of carbon emissions. Over 40% of carbon emissions come from motor vehicles. What I think is more important to note is, despite the fact that it is well known that carbon emissions is what's causing climate change, and reduction of carbon emissions will mitigate some of the impact of climate change, and the use of electric vehicles will reduce the carbon emissions, which will reduce, therefore, climate change. The US and Europe is imposing incredible amounts of duties on Chinese-made electric vehicles. US is imposing 100% duty on Chinese electric vehicles. Europe, depending on the brand, is imposing up to 45% duty. Now, it bewilders me that well-made, inexpensive, accessible to all Chinese electric vehicles should be promoted in a way that would allow climate change reduction to take place, or carbon emission reduction to take place, and reduce the impact of climate change. Instead of that, US and Europe, EU in particular here, is making it more difficult for their consumers who would like to participate in carbon emission reduction, who would like to do good for the earth, making it more difficult for them to access the vehicles that will make them do good. So all this talk about climate change, about environmental protection that the West had been promoting for the last decade or two, when it comes to real action, they're taking counteraction. They're taking action actually against the betterment of the world. I think this hypocritical position, stance, is now becoming so obvious. Why is it this way? It's because China has become so advanced in electric vehicles, not only in manufacturing, but the technology is becoming very difficult for the traditional behemoth to catch up. But this, for your narrow financial interest, can make you go counter to carbon emission reduction, go counter to improving the world's climate, reducing climate change. It shows how hypocritical some of these Western countries have become. Despite the attacks of the Western countries and the United States, electric vehicles are spreading all over the world anyway. My trip to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, I saw a lot of electric vehicles on the road, and this is really interesting. Speaking to friends there, they say that the expression which keeps on getting into their head is Stone Age did not end because humans ran out of stones. Stone Age ended because men discovered something better, iron. And the same thing is going to happen with fossil fuels. The age of fossil fuels will not end because fossil fuels run out. It will happen because of new and renewable sources of energy have become prominent and acceptable and very inexpensive, such as solar. I think in this context, we can see China is the biggest producer of solar panel, has the biggest capacity for solar panel manufacturing in the world. China is the biggest producer of electric vehicles and the biggest take-up use of electric vehicles by its consumers in the world as well, percentage-wise. And all of this indicates that in terms of carbon emissions reduction and climate change remediation, China is taking the lead. And the Global South will follow. The Global South is following